Hello and welcome to the Ski Racing Podcast with me, Ed Drake. Joining me on this second episode is Olympian Luke Steyn and superfan Ben Clark as we look back at the race of the season as well as the standout performance in this 2020 World Cup Tour. Ben, what are your highlights?
I picked a couple races out, one from the men's, one from the women's. The women's was from the slalom in Zagreb, which I titled the Vlhova Masterclass. Obviously we had Shiffrin make a bit of a mistake on the first run, lose a fair bit of time, but then Vlhova just took the entire field apart, Shiffrin included. Liensberger in third place was 3.5 seconds off, and 10th place was nearly 5 seconds off. Nice. That is absolute domination. And in the preview podcast, you said, Zagreb's a really long hill. You really have to bring your A game. You've got to be fit. You've got to be strong. And we already know Vlhova is that, but she really showed it that day.
It was proper demolition, wasn't it? She absolutely smashed it. And you're right, Shiffrin made that mistake on the first run. You thought that it was going to be a case of, right, here comes Shiffrin. We're going to see this full 180. It's going to be Shiffrin having an absolute monster second run and take this back from Vlhova. But Vlhova withstood a serious amount of pressure. She just watched Shiffrin come down, take the lead by, I think she took the lead by over 1.5 seconds over Liensberger, who was leading at the time. And then Vlhova just going, do you know what? I'm not even bothered. Didn't break a sweat, went at her second run in full attack mode, even though she had a substantial lead already, and built on that advantage with an error-free second run from Shiffrin.
It was. You don't often see Shiffrin making mistakes, but the one on the first run was, by her standards, quite a big mistake. But I sat watching that second run thinking, this is going to be brilliant. If she lays down an absolute monster, will Vlhova be able to handle the pressure? Will she try and ski reserved and just hold on to her advantage the way we see Shiffrin do when she's dominated the first run? She just manages the second run. Will she go for that? Or will she really attack and say, no, it doesn't matter if you have your best run. I'm skiing that well that it will still be good enough.
Yeah, she had 7/10 to play with after the first run. So like you said, she could have, taken it a little bit easier, but she didn't. And when you've got Shiffrin in second, who's used to putting the power down, it must be really nerve-wracking saying, I'm just going to go for it on this run and build the lead. And obviously a little bit uncharacteristic of Shiffrin to drop back like that. She almost had nothing to lose.
I do think that Shiffrin having such a monster second run, she's won races by such big margins in the past that really piled the pressure onto Vlhova, who stood in the start gate. Yes, Shiffrin has been blitzing races all season long, but then Vlhova, to realise that Shiffrin's done so well, I think made her realise that she still had to push because of Shiffrin's sort of past performances. Vlhova knew that she still couldn't rest even though she had that margin because Shiffrin is so good. And then Vlhova just nailed every single turn, every single piece of terrain, and every single timing change, terrain change, combination change in the corset, absolutely blitzed it inch perfect the way down and took that win by so far. I think that was actually the race where Shiffrin got a bit annoyed with the press, and she talked about it in her interview, saying how disrespectful it was to the other athletes when the press say, why didn't you win? Was it because you made a mistake? And actually Shiffrin turns around and goes, no, there are very talented skiers in this field, and it's really disrespectful for you to think that it's only due to me making a mistake that somebody else wins. So I think that was kind of a nice reality check for the press, and I think we were probably victims of it as well in terms of you look at Shiffrin, when she's got her skis on, she's supposed to win.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen over the years from her. So you do get lulled into thinking that's all she needs to do. We know she works incredibly hard, and because she picks her races as well and sits weekends out, you're almost just on autopilot that if she's entered this weekend, she's probably going to win. And that really shows just what a performance that was from Vlhova.
Yeah, it was certainly extremely impressive. What about on the men's side? Which one did you pick out there?
And for the men's, I picked the Val d'Isère slalom, bit early on in the season, quite a long way back. And again, for some reason, I haven't picked particularly close races. I've picked another demolition, where Pantero, on one of the hardest hills going, in front of the home fans, laid an absolute monster down, and beat Mura and Stefano Gross and Christopherson. They were all separated by 400ths. Pantero was a second and a half in front of them. Everyone else stacked in, tight and close, and he just said, "Don't worry, boys, I've got this."
It's sort of become a calling card of Pantero. Steeps are his thing.
Steeps, ice.
Yeah, and that place is super tough. It's down the Fasta Belvard. It's always icy. It's always
gnarly.
It's such a tricky piece. And for Pantero, again, home pressure round the corner is his hometown. To come there in front of the French crowd with their chainsaws going and the French and the French flags flying with all the flares going off and stuff. It's their own version of Schladming. And for those guys to be there and for them Pantero to absolutely take the field apart was super impressive.
Good stuff from the Courchevel kid. But I'd also like to mention Luke Winters.
Yes.
Was in second after the first run. I think from late 40s. He's had some really good shining performances this season. Not being able to put 1 and 2 together like we've talked about in the past, that is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
2 runs, really consistent. But I'm really excited to see what he brings to the table next year once he's sort of like calmed down a bit, had the season to hopefully train and, you know, come back and know that he can put in those performances.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a flash in the pan for him either, was it? He managed to do another first run similar to that, not quite as high up in the leaderboard after that first run. I can't exactly remember where it was, but he was right up there in another race. So he's chasing the Holy Grail, getting 2 runs down together. But he absolutely smashed it. He pushed hard. He wasn't afraid to charge. Even when he was right up there in Val d'Isère, he still pushed. Made some big mistakes, finished in the teens. But I think, you know, he finished with a smile on his face, which is what it's all about. I've actually donned the short skis on that piste as well. Down the fast. More happy on the longboards, raced Alpine Combined there, which was a little tricky on those little skis. But it's so difficult, and it's almost survival because it's so tricky. It's not necessarily about who brings the best performance, it's about who makes the fewest errors.
And when I was looking back at this was a pretty good day for Dave. Came 17th. At the time, we were a bit, not disappointed, but we said it was okay. But when you think at times, we say Dave doesn't have the best of days out on the most gnarly piste, and that is one of the worst ones going. 17th was a good day. You know, perhaps we've talked about it a few times, perhaps we expect a little bit too much of him at times, but that was another solid day.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky when we'll talk about it at length a little bit later on, but I think all round, when Dave goes and looks back at Val d'Isère, it's not his favourite piste, so I think actually 17th was probably fair enough, I think, in reality for him.
And one of the, one of the other bits I liked about this race was we had Christopherson have an absolute nightmare on the first run, skiing to 27th, but then do what Luke's mentioned a couple times. He puts down monster second runs. Yeah. He went from 27th to 4th. He had the fastest second run, and it was just a kind of an early indicator that it was going to be one of those years for Christopherson where he got himself really mad about something and then skied an absolute blinder to make up
flying
for it.
everywhere.
Yeah, bits of skis, poles, boots going everywhere in the finish area. Lots of grumpiness, but then that second run is just like, this is what I'm here to do, and I think he needs to find some kind of coach to just get him in that mind state.
He's coached by his dad, isn't he?
To get himself in that mental state without having to throw a strop beforehand, to just get him in that position where he's like, here goes.
We talked about it a bit in the first episode about how nobody really stuck their hand in the air and went, I'm going to take this by the scruff of the neck. We've seen performances like you just said from Christopherson, ups and downs. 27th on the first run, wins the second run, finishes in 4th. Pantero dominating by over a second, and then DNFing 3 races in a row. It seemed like all season long on the Tech Tour, probably the Slalom Tour specifically, they were tripping over each other. Nobody really put together a decent string of results to actually go, do you know what, I'm going to be the guy that everybody is going to have to work hard to beat. Yeah. And they sort of just left the door open left, right and centre.
Which is what made it so exciting. But I wouldn't have ever put money on anyone. You know, I would have bet anywhere.
Oh, just because it was so up and down.
So difficult to know what was going to happen.
And the final reason I picked this race was because the rest of the podium, Andre Meurer and Stefano Gross, showing that you don't have to be, a youngster in your 20s, showing everyone up on the World Cup Tour. Yeah. These guys been doing it forever and stepping up on the hardest piece and saying sometimes this is how you do it.
Yeah, he's no Duracell bunny. But obviously the experience really pays off on a slope like that. Like you said, Ed, the less mistakes you make in Val d'Isère, the more chance you have of being successful.
What about you, Luke? What did you choose?
I have gone for a little bit of an opposite to Ben. I haven't gone for an absolute
demolition.
Spanking. I've gone for a slightly closer race, very close race, Adelboden GS.
Well, what a weekend that was.
Conditions were near perfect. And after the first run, you had to be less than 1.44 off to be in the top 30. If that's not testament to how close the sport has got, we've talked about often how difficult it is to make that jump from, Euros to World Cup. And there was a lot of guys. There were 7 guys with bib 31 or above in the top 30 on the second run. So 2 Italians of note.
Dielli Prandini.
That's the one.
Yeah, good.
And Borsotti bib 53 into second. Unfortunately, they both came out second run, which was absolutely gutting. Would love to have seen one of them on the podium. But I mean, that race was so exciting to see.
Ben just talked about the podiums in the slalom in Val d'Isère being between first and second was 1.44.
Yeah.
And that was the whole of the race.
Yeah. Definitely my highlight.
Which is just ridiculous. And on that hill as well, but that is definitely one of the tech highlights, that race piece. Again, we talked about having everything in there. It's out of the start, rolls. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you go over this pitch into a free fall. You see the grandstand around you. You just hear this wall of noise coming at you. And the Swiss fans going absolutely ballistic. It's
not one of those races which you would have associated with being that close, but yeah, it was a spectacle.
It was one of Hirsch's big favourites. I think he's won back-to-back there, both slalom and GS.
The double
for forever almost. But it's also just such a highlight on the calendar for any ski racing fan.
Adelboden is one that if I was ever good enough to race on the World Cup, that would be one of the ones I would immediately want to put down as I definitely want to ski that hill on proper race day conditions. I'd probably end up just sliding down it, but I would really want to, because like you said, the terrain on it, and just as they're dropping over that steep into like the cauldron in the finish area, just looks incredible. And that's one of the few places on the World Cup Tour where the directors can get some really good shots to show you how steep it is. They've got like the wire cam over their shoulder as they're dropping down. You're like, finally, a TV angle where you can actually show how steep it is, because the amount of times they're like, this is an 18-degree pitch, and you look at them coming down and go, doesn't look like it. That's one of the ones where they have the perfect shot as they roll over that hill. Behind, isn't it, as they ski over that roll, and then you just see the skier disappear, and you've got the crowd, you've just got the grandstand, all those Swiss flags just going mental with all the horns and the cowbells. It's iconic ski racing, and I think it's going to be one that we're going to see for such a long time. It was super impressive, but I think it goes to show the depth of talent that we've got on the tour at the moment, especially on the men's side when it comes to, when you're talking between 30th and first place being less than a second and a half, that's one mistake between you being on a podium and you being outside and only getting to do one of your 2 runs.
Or one face plant if you're Charlie Raposo. Sorry, Charlie.
He'll appreciate that one. So I think it's going to be a case of that is going to be living long in the memory of a lot of ski racing fans. It was certainly high up on my list of races that I enjoyed watching this year.
And women's, I don't want to talk about it too much now because I want to talk about it in terms of a specific athlete, but Kranjska Kora, Alice Robinson was just phenomenal there. And I'll talk about her later on a little bit more. But that race is just brutal.
They moved it from, so they're supposed to be racing in Maribor in Slovenia, and then because of the lack of snow, they've moved it over to what is typically the men's hill in Kranjska Gora. So it was a tough race piste, and you're right. We'll crack onto that one in a little bit once we've got through these. My choices, I've got a couple. Actually, one of my favourites on the ladies' side was Le Tuile in Italy, which was relatively recently, and I think it was one of my favourites because it was so tight. We saw a standout performance from Nina Ortlieb, who took her first World Cup win, Austrian ski racer. Brunoni was 100th behind in second place, and Suter misses consistency in third place, only 700ths back. That piste was very, very tricky. The snow conditions were excellent, and it was just one of those where the best skier won on the day, and it's nice to see a new young athlete. The Austrians have been under so much pressure because they've not been performing all season long. To then have her take her first win was something that I was pretty pleased to see.
Yeah, I think at the time that was one of the first wins basically since the I think the Canadian leg of the speed tour at the start of the season. That Schmidhofer had got a win early, and then Austrians hadn't had a win on the women's side of the tour until it turned out to be one of the last races of the season. And Ortlieb put in a great performance. We saw how much it meant to Brunoni as well, because she was dissecting that performance. She had a bit of a Christopherson in the finish. It wasn't too bad. First of all, it was just like pure frustration and so close.
Yeah, it was one of those, like, first you come across the line, sort of giving it like, tiny margins, and then all of a sudden,
minutes later, damn.
And then it was the boots coming off, and she was just like, and I think you could see it was more for her because she was in front of her home fans, and to come that close to the win was just agonising for her. And I felt so bad for her, and it was getting to that stage of the season where every point matters in terms of that overall globe. So she was 0.1 or 0.01 of a second, and that cost her 20 points in the overall.
And so that was sort of my women's pick, but I also had a couple of others I just want to chuck in there. Crans Montana, Lara Gut doing the double. We spoke about it briefly on the previous episode with Lara Gut, having been sort of middle of the pack for the last season, 2 seasons maybe, to then step up in front of a home crowd, does the double, looks like she's back, smiling, happy, charging. As well, Ravensburg picking up her first ever downhill World Cup win in front of her home crowd. She did crash the next day in Super G and end her season, but I love the fact that we get so many different winners all season long, whether it's been women's side, men's side. It's been properly good in terms of having this sort of plethora of champions. I'm going to move on to my men's pick. So my pick on the men's side is Kvitfjell downhill, and it's not necessarily the race, the performance itself in terms of the skiing, because Kvitfjell isn't the most gnarly, it's not the longest, it's not the iciest, it's not got the biggest jumps. But in terms of the overall performance, the whole picture of the race, we saw Matthias Meyer take the win, Kilder 1400ths behind in front of a home crowd, and Carlo Janka finding the podium yet again. But it was the atmosphere. It was a pin drop atmosphere. You talk about Kilder looking to try and make up for the fact that he'd crashed in the Super G the day before, which actually cost him the Globe, the Super G Globe. But he had to take as many points out of the race as possible, because we saw even Pantero sticking on downhill skis to try and pick up some points in front of a home crowd. He had what looked like the run of his life, error-free. Then all of a sudden, Matthias Meyer, under all the pressure, he's had some sickness through the season. The pressure was all on Kilder. And then all of a sudden, Meyer comes down and he just goes for it. And he was error-free, so silky smooth, so clean. Broke Kilder's heart in terms of a home victory.
Well, they'd said in the build-up he'd never even podiumed in Norway before in a World Cup race, which, when you think of where he was this season, was a really big surprise. You thought he'd gone from never podiuming in his own home country to, oh my God, he's going to win. Yeah. And then Meyer went, hold on, guys. I'm feeling much better now.
It's like a rejection.
I've got over the flu, and it turns out I'm really good at this gliding business as well.
It was so cool, and the whole atmosphere was just mega from start to finish. And then after such a good day, we're then ready for the Super G to try and continue this tale of whether Kilder was going to take it over Pantero for the overall. Obviously, ultimately, it didn't matter for Kilder, but then cancelled that Super G, which then handed the title to Kvitfjell for the Globe. But So I think some pretty exciting racing all season long. But what about the performance of the season from an athlete's perspective? Ben, in terms of the whole year, where was the one run or the one race that you thought from one athlete, this is it, this is the performance?
I mean, there are probably quite a few to choose from, and I think we probably had quite a lot of overlap in the ones that we've picked. But one I wanted to call out was, again, right back to the start of the season, was Esther Ledecka. The downhill win in Lake Louise this was the first year she said she was going to really commit to the World Cup skiing side. She said she'd still do the snowboard events as well, but she said she would prioritise skiing over snowboarding this season. So obviously you have those first couple of races where you're in Solden and it's just the GS tech experts, and then you're in Levy. Then you got Levy a month later, and then the speed girls and guys get to show their skills. And everyone was like, oh, I wonder how she's going to do. And she just dominated that first race. We're like, oh, well,
that's what she's going to do.
Ledecka's here for the season, and it was really good to see that then carry on. She had some podiums in Super G, and I think she ended up on, I think maybe third overall in the downhill standings.
Yeah, it was on the downhill side, yeah.
And that was really good. And just right at the start of the season, a lot of people would have thought that Olympic win was a bit of a fluke because you had Schifrin skis that are going to be lightning and fully taken care of. And she just said, no, it's not a fluke. I am that good.
It was unreal. I think I was in the Eurosport office and was commentating one of the men's races and watching in between two runs, because obviously there's time between both runs. I'm sitting in the office doing my prep for the second run and look up on the TV and there's parallel snowboarding and Ledecka's there winning. You're like, what on earth? She's literally come away from the previous weekend where she's podiuming on downhill skis, and then the following weekend, she's in a whole different part of Europe racing on a snowboard. I mean, I couldn't even win racing one discipline, let alone multiple disciplines
and
multiple sports. Just unfair. It's just not fair. Just not fair. I'm having a paddy. Not good.
And that's how good she is, and that's why I picked Ledecka out for there. There's a plenty of other options as well, and you guys no doubt will cover them, but that was really one of the standouts for me.
Excellent. Do you have one on the men's side? You've got one on that side?
I did. I put down the Zubcic win in the GS because it was quite monumental. It's been a long time coming. And it was. And he looked like he just did not feel the pressure at all. He put in some brilliant skiing. He'd been slowly climbing the ranks throughout the season. And looked like he was ready for it, but I think with the likes of Tommy Ford and people showing up and putting in wins, we weren't quite expecting it from him. And then he delivered, and it was good.
In terrible conditions as well.
Yeah. He was. That was my top pick too for the men's. He had that second in Adelboden in January. And then he went on to show that he wasn't a one-trick pony, and then in Hinterstoder the week later, he came second again. And he's still quite young. And I think it's the first podium for a Croatian, especially on the men's side, since Kostelic.
Yeah, so it'll be a few years.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was the first Croatian men's giant slalom victory, because I don't think Kostelic ever did. I think that's the stat you're looking for. I think Kostelic obviously in Alpine Combines, I think he picked up a couple in Super G and then obviously mostly slalom. But yeah, Croatia's first ever giant slalom victory. And that race was brutal. We're out in Japan. It was snowing heavily. The snow underfoot was really soft. I think he'd had an okay middle of the pack first run, another athlete that had a subpar run followed by an absolute stormer and took the win from, I think he was like 12th or something after the first run. So a fair few races had still left to challenge. And he just went, you know what, I believe what I've got here. And he went down and just took by the scruff of the neck and walked away with Croatia's first win in giant slalom, his first win in giant slalom. And where did he finish up on the overall giant slalom tour standings? He was third.
Yeah. I mean, it was so nice to see him embrace Kostelic in the finish. I think Kostelic has spent a lot of his time on Zubcic in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that is
really believed in him. Really believed in him, and sort of like taken it under his wing and tried to sort of like mentor him. And so it was really good to see Zubcic like sort of come out of his skin this season and really perform well. I think we're going to see a lot of good things from him next season. Yeah,
absolutely. So Ben stole your
men's and I'm
pick.
about to steal your women's pick.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Cheers.
Alice Robinson
Nice one.
from New Zealand, a nation which haven't had sort of a lot of success since the
90s, I think it was. I can't remember what the name is, but 90s.
Yeah, especially on the women's
Yeah.
side. 18 years old. Tail end of last season, we saw her with some really good results. A second or a third, I believe, in Andorran World Cup finals.
Yeah.
In Soldeo. And then this season, she's got 2 wins, one in Kranjska and then the other one in the first race of the season in Solden. And then also another second in Andorra. Now, Kranjska and Solden are not easy hills, but
No.
you know, Kranjska especially is you know, the men's GS hill, which we would all consider a very difficult hill.
It's super tough. That last
yeah.
pitch is like 50% gradient or something. It's
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah, and to see her arc every single turnout was just amazing.
Yeah, Alice Robinson this season, what a season it was. She really burst onto the scene last year at RA at the World Champs with that second run performance where she went from high 20s into like 6th place at World Champs. And then this year, won that opening race, and you're just like, this is a real performance for her. And it was a little bit of a surprise. She was super aggressive on her edges. She was clean and dynamic down the steep, and she just set about that field. And it was a little bit of a surprise in terms of, you know, Schifrin's supposed to win this. What's going on with everybody else? Then the rest of the season, she had to take a bit of time off just after Solden with that injury, meant that she missed the next couple of GSs. And then all of a sudden, that Kranjska Gora race was ridiculous. Every single turn she knifed, every single turn she moved the body weight forward, accelerating the ski turn to turn, and she absolutely tore the field apart. We talked about it earlier on with Vlhova dominating a field, and that was domination of the slalom field, but this was domination of a giant slalom field, and she absolutely thoroughly deserved that win.
Yeah, watching that second run, watching some of the other athletes kind of start building up the second run when you're trying to get a feel for how difficult the course is, where there are any difficult gates, and there was a few gates in there that pretty much the entire field were either backing off or putting a bit of a slide in at the top of the turn. And as Luke said, she just absolutely knifed all of those turns, and to the point where I was laughing. It was such good skiing. I was just watching him going, this is incredible. And I was just giggling watching it going, this is ski racing. This is what I want to watch every week on such a difficult hill. And I'm glad they moved it from Maribor. I'm a big fan of the women racing on as tougher hills as the men, because Alice Robinson shows you can do it. And Schifrin's going to say, you know, throw me down the steep. I don't care.
Yeah.
They can ski just as well on this, and I was so happy to watch that. And like I said, it was just what, poetry in motion. That second run.
It was seriously good. And on the men's side, it's got to be a downhill, and for me, it had to be Bormio with Dominic Paris's double downhill victory. He was in a different league. He didn't win. I think he won both of the downhills. One of them he won by a couple of hundredths. The other one he won by a few tenths. But he literally just tore that hill a new one. He just blitzed it. It was Bormio downhill doesn't get the respect that it deserves, I don't think. When you talk about gnarly downhills, you think about Kitzbühel and you think about the classics. You think about Wengen, but being gnarly in a different way with big jumps, but long race piece. But Bormio is over 2 minutes long. It's top to bottom turny. It's top to bottom icy, and it's top to bottom big jumps and steep conditions. And he was on another level. The guy just, I don't know whether he has. It's going to sound like I'm being disrespectful, like a brain in his head in terms of like a fear factor, because he literally doesn't. He just went out of the
risk.
He just bull in a china shop. He just went for it.
He enjoys it.
Yeah, he skis at his best in those sort of conditions.
Yeah.
It's weird. I mean, we talked about in the last episode how Foyts can get so close to him with a completely different technique, but he just shows the mountain no respect.
Yeah.
Other people, when they go to places like Kitzbühel, Wengen and Bormio, they've heard about it, they've done the practice runs, their like knees and back are probably still hurting from 2 days training runs, and Paris just goes, this is so much fun. And he looks like he is having, you know, he plays in his like death metal band or whatever it is for his fun outside of skiing, and it just seems like that personality suits that hill perfectly.
Do we know how he's doing with his recovery, when he's going to be back?
Well, we don't know when anyone's going to be back.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think he's rehabbing the knee, and I've seen a bit on social media that he's just starting his training but a case, I guess. I wonder. We'll talk again. This we'll say for another episode, but it's going to be interesting to see how people's summer plans take hold, and actually it might benefit him because nobody's going to be on skates.
Best season to be injured.
Yeah, maybe. And I think that we were robbed of a real battle for the downhill globe and the Super G globe as well, with Paris liking the Super G as well. Shall we move on to the last category for the episode? Surprise performers and disappointed athletes. Luke, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so for me, the surprise performance of the season, throughout the whole season, was Luke Winters. It's really cool to see a young guy come in there and show the older guys or the more experienced guys that, we can disrupt the field. But in terms of consistency, combined with sort of being young, Clement Noel, for me, shows the most amount of potential for the future. He's 97?
I think, 22, 23,
and he, on a lot of runs that he was winning, a lot of races he was winning after the first run, he held his cool together and still won the second run. That's quite rare to see from someone, so young.
And 2 points away from taking the overall, taking the slalom globe.
Yeah, so. Yeah, he'll be disappointed in that, but I think he's got a lot to look forward to. So from the positives, that was mine. Maybe from the negative, Schwartz. He had some glimmers of good skiing throughout the season, but the biggest disappointment was Schladming when he was winning after the first run. Home crowd, winning after the first run. I mean, nothing better than an Austrian winning at Schladming. And then second run, he messed up on the fourth gate. Really horrible.
That was definitely a bit of a mind melt moment. He was skied so well in that first run. I think a little bit of a surprise for most people there because he hadn't been at that level of performance throughout the winter so far. And then I think he just sort of overthought, because that fourth or fifth gate, whichever one it was really tricky, and it had caught out quite a few races, and he just fell into that trap that it was a tricky gate and almost made it harder for himself by sort of pulling back and coming off the gas a little bit rather than just skiing normally through it. And it just meant that he DNF'd in front of a home crowd. Just absolutely demoralising scenario for that guy. Ben, you had a couple that you wanted to shout out.
It wasn't really a kind of surprise in the way Luke Winters was, but I definitely wanted to touch on Brignone, and I've been digging through her stats for the season, and obviously she's won the overall. She had a monster year, but some of these stats were hilarious. She had 25 starts, 20 top 10s, 11 podiums, 5 wins, and she was on the top 3 for 6 out of the 7 available globes.
Nuts.
That is incredible. And we touched on it in a previous podcast. She was a known entity in the women's, but no one was picking her for a single one of the tour titles, let alone contending in 6 out of 7. That is absolutely phenomenal. So I having looked into it, I was like, I've got to go and read out some of these stats because that's incredible. Only 3 DNFs in a whole season is just brilliant.
Well, and that again harks back to the fact that we talk about so much of this is about being consistent, and she just, I don't know, I guess that sort of carefree, she wasn't somebody that was looked at, so she was able to then go under the radar and just go about being one of the most talented ski racers on the tour at the moment.
Exactly. And on the men's side, I put them Austrian men's team as a disappointment in the tech side, which is very harsh, but when you think in slalom you had the likes of Schwartz, coming off an injury, but you still expected fairly big things from him based on what you'd seen. Manny Feller, Michael Matt, and we saw nothing from any of them really all season. It was only right towards the end you had a couple of glimmers of hope with Pertl and Gastrein, with a little bit of hope for the future. But they've really shown that there is a lot of work to be done on that men's side.
Yeah, well, I wonder whether it's a bit of a Hirscher hangover. We've talked about that again in previous discussions that we've had. That the fact that the Austrian skiing has been in this golden age of Marcel Hirscher winning 8 globes back to back, winning everything there is to win in the world of ski racing, and therefore putting a gloss on Austrian skiing, which also then alleviated the pressure on your likes of Schwarz and Feller and Matt. So now that he's not there, all of a sudden it's this sort of where's the wind going to come from? And that pressure hasn't suited the Austrians at all. And you think about a nation of ski racers, when I think about my ski racing career, and I'm sure you guys are similar, when it comes to racing against the Austrians, you think of them as, you know, almost metronomic in terms of being able to deal with pressure, being able to come up with the goods when it's needed. And this season they most certainly didn't, and they would have been torn to absolute shreds in the press, in the Austrian press. From the press in terms of my side of things with the podcast or the commentating sort of stuff, we're left a little bit in the realms of what's going on with Austria. But in terms of Austrian press, they are digging out these guys for not being good enough this year.
And I guess they got a little not lucky on the speed side, but they had Meyer and Kriechmeier performing pretty regularly. So the speed side was kind of kept themselves to themselves.
Yeah.
They got the big win at Kitzbühel. That's the one they want.
Yeah.
But then on the tech side, like you said, they almost had, you know, you'd almost say it was a win for the Austrians if they came away with Kitzbühel and Schladming.
Yeah.
Like, even if they didn't win anything else the rest of the season, like, we got the two we wanted. But then, you know, because of that mistake.
Yeah, you could have almost glossed over it had Schwarz won in Schladming, because all of a sudden it would have been like, well, we won the big ones, and so here we are. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Have you got any other little bits, or shall I go?
No, you can go.
I'm going to stick to nations, because I think you guys have covered like athletes pretty well in terms of the surprise, the good stuff and the bad stuff. But I want to say the Swiss as a whole nation. If you look at a powerhouse of skiing, historically it's been Austria. Switzerland have turned around, won the Nations Cup, taken everything. Won multiple globes. They've won women's side, they've won men's side, they've won tech, they've won speed. They're ticking all boxes, and the depth is unreal at the moment for the Swiss, which makes a nice change from it just being all about the Austrians. So the Swiss athletes have absolutely been top draw from start to finish. Daniel Yule, arguably one of the guys that's hit hardest by not finishing the season properly. He's had a couple of DNFs, but he had a real purple patch through the middle of that winter, picking up back-to-back World Cup wins. And so I think at the same time as being super impressed with the Swiss, I feel like the Corona stuff may have just cost Daniel Yule, which would have been nice from a Brit perspective. I know that we try and claim him when he's good, when he's going well, and we distance him when he's not going well. But it's been a great performance for them. A couple of youngsters coming through. You've got Jakobsen from Sweden looking like if he can actually finish. We talk about Holy Grail being 2 runs, but if Jakobsen can finish 1 run, it would be nice to see what he's got to offer, as well as some of these youngsters. Lucas Bratton from Norway, unbelievable talent, 18 years old, winning first runs, podiuming in first legs, just narrowly missing out on the podium in, I think it was Kitzbühel, where he was 4th. I can't remember exactly, but very close to podiuming, and the future's bright for those young guys. So I think all in all, we've had a pretty impressive season from a lot of the youngsters. Maybe the old guard, I don't know. It seems to have been a season for the youngsters this year.
We had a bit of both, because you had Clary and those guys having the old man podiums as well.
About that.
There were stages in the season where we had the old guard really stepping up.
Mould before he'd picked up his injury.
Yeah, had a few races where that was the case.
The other thing that I nearly forgot to mention, sorry Ben, before I get overexcited, is the whole stuff with the old guard, with the Italians, with Manfred Molg and the former Olympic champ from Italy.
Razzoli,
thank you. Before I
just leave you stretching there.
Yeah, thanks. These old guys coming back, and actually, I think when you talk about the youngsters having such a good season, which they definitely have, I think the older guard have learnt quite a lot, because you're exactly right. I nearly forgot about a couple of the French guys. You look at JB Grange learning from Clement Noel, all of a sudden picking his performances up. You've got 40-year-old guys in Lizaru getting second runs and close to top 10s. So I think it's been a pretty entertaining season. And I think that will bring us to the end of this second episode of the 2020 review. Thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye for now.